Have you ever stopped to consider that maybe the political systems we think of as complete opposites might actually share some surprising underlying traits?
It's a provocative thought, isn't it?
It really is. And today, we're digging into exactly that, looking at Ryszard Legutko's book, The Demon in Democracy, Totalitarian Temptations in Free Societies.
Yeah, and this whole exploration got a bit of a jumpstart from watching Mindful Moments. You know that YouTube channel?
Oh, right. The one using AI for book analysis.
Exactly. It really sparked some interesting thinking. And Legutko's perspective is, well, unique.
Because he lived it, right, in Poland.
Precisely. He saw communism firsthand, then the shift to liberal democracy.
Yeah.
Plus, he's a philosopher, a politician. He brings a lot to the table.
So our goal today really is to unpack some of his key insights, see if they challenge how we usually think about modern politics.
And one of the first things Legutko noticed, something quite startling, was how easily some former communist officials seemed to just fit into the new liberal democratic setup in Poland.
That is interesting. Like, the transition wasn't the complete break people might have expected.
Kind of. It suggested to him, perhaps, more continuity underneath than it was obvious on the surface. Poland really offers this fascinating laboratory for comparing the two.
Okay, so let's get into the comparisons. What about how they view history? That seems fundamental.
Absolutely. Legutko argues both communism and liberal democracy share this particular view of history, almost like they believe history has a direction.
A direction leading straight to them.
Pretty much, yeah. That their system is the inevitable endpoint, the culmination of progress. They're both what he calls historicist.
Meaning they see the past tradition as something to overcome, something backward.
Exactly. Communism had its narrative of the proletariat's inevitable rise, right? And liberal democracy, well, you have Fukuyama's end of history idea, the triumph of liberal values. Both think they sort of figured it out.
And Legutko connects this to intellectuals, saying it gives them a kind of illusion.
An illusion of power, yeah. This feeling of being on the right side of history, part of this inevitable march forward.
That historical view then feeds into something else, right? A kind of utopianism.
Definitely. Both systems, though obviously in very different ways, are aiming for some kind of ideal future state, a perfected society where their principles reign supreme.
So they're both chasing a finish line, a perfect world according to their rules.
You could put it that way.
Yeah.
Legutko says both are utopian and look forward to an end of history where their systems will prevail as a permanent status quo.
And believing you have the blueprint for utopia, well, that can justify a lot of tinkering with society, can't it? Social engineering.
It can. Even if the methods are vastly different, well, obviously far more brutal. But the underlying impulse is there. And Legutko adds another layer.
Which is?
He notes that both systems refuse to undertake any critical examination of their ideological prejudices. There's a resistance to fundamentally questioning their own core beliefs.
That's a really pointed comparison, a sort of built-in certainty about their own rightness. How does this translate into politics on the ground?
Well, here's where it gets quite tangible. Legutko points to the expansion of politics, how it seeps into areas that traditionally weren't seen as political.
Like what sort of areas?
Things like family life, religion, education, even culture. Under communism, this was overt state control.
Right.
But Legutko argues that in liberal democracy, too, these spheres become increasingly politicized, judged by political standards. He actually says democracy is described as totalitarian because social institutions become subsumed within its law.
Wow, totalitarian is a strong word to apply to democracy there.
It is, and he uses it provocatively. His point is about the scope of political logic expanding, eroding those independent social spaces that exist outside the state's direct control or ideological framework.
So less room for ways of life or thinking that don't fit the dominant political mold.
That's the idea. And it connects to how both systems view the individual.
How so?
Both tend to elevate this idea of the common man, liberated from the past, from tradition, almost defining people primarily by their equality in their relationship to the current political system, rather than, say, history, faith, or deep community ties.
Okay, let's talk ideology. Communism was obviously built on a massive, explicit ideology. Where's the parallel in liberal democracy, according to Legutko?
He argues that liberal democracy also operates with a powerful, if sometimes less obvious, ideology that shapes how we see things, what we value, what gets discussed.
So it's not just about rational argument.
Not entirely.
Yeah.
He suggests that persuasion in these regimes isn't achieved by intellectual argument, but by indoctrination into an a priori ideology, meaning you absorb a set of core assumptions about equality, autonomy, rights, progress that become the starting point, the given, rather than things constantly up for debate.
And if you step outside those assumptions,
then you risk being seen as backward, unenlightened, maybe even intolerant yourself. Conformity gets rewarded, dissent gets marginalized. Think about how certain ideas become common sense or the only acceptable view in public discourse.
A kind of soft pressure to conform, maybe. Different from communist coercion, but still a pressure.
Exactly. The mechanisms are different, but the outcome can be a similar narrowing of acceptable thought. The communist man and the liberal democratic man can both become, well, unwilling to see value outside their own system's framework.
Let's pivot to religion. This is a big one for Legutko, isn't it?
Huge. Obviously, communism was officially atheist and actively repressed religion. Liberal democracy doesn't typically do that.
No, it guarantees religious freedom, usually.
It does, but Legutko argues it tends to push religion out of the public square. Privatize it. Treat it as a personal preference rather than a public truth or a source of societal values.
And he experienced this quite strongly himself back in Poland.
He did. He actually wrote, and this is quite shocking, "When I hear the rhetoric of today's anti-Christian crusaders in my own country, I am shattered. Such aggressive, foul language against religion I have never heard in my entire life, not even under the communist regime."
Wow. That's a powerful statement. Saying the anti-religious rhetoric felt worse to him sometimes than under communism.
That's a stark claim, yeah. His analysis is that both systems, in their own ways, try to replace traditional religion's role with a kind of secular alternative.
Like what?
Well, under communism, it was the party, the ideology itself. In liberal democracy, he suggests it's a devotion to certain values, like equality, autonomy, rights, but often detached from any transcendent or religious grounding. A kind of civil religion focused on worldly progress.
You know, this connects back to some things we often explore, drawing on sources like mindful moments and, well, discussions like this one. How even really positive values, if they become the only values or get pushed to an extreme,
Can sometimes crowd out other important things.
Yeah.
It's about balance, isn't it?
Yeah. So this triumph of the common man idea you mentioned earlier, this vision of humanity focused on equality, freedom from the past, present satisfaction, that seems to be the connecting thread for Legutko.
It really does seem central to his argument. He sees this particular view of what it means to be human shaping everything: education, culture, politics in both systems, albeit with different goals and methods.
And his critique is that this vision, while appealing in some ways, might actually be impoverished. It simplifies what humans are capable of.
Exactly. That it potentially limits our understanding of human flourishing, which historically involved things like virtue, tradition, transcendence, not just equality and autonomy.
No, it's really crucial to add a caveat here, isn't it? Legutko himself is very clear about something.
Oh, absolutely. He explicitly states that liberal democracy is, quote, manifestly superior humanly and politically to all forms of totalitarianism. He's not saying they're morally equivalent or that living under communism was remotely like living in the West.
Right. The human cost is vastly different. His point is more subtle.
It's about shared tendencies, these underlying philosophical currents, these subtle ways that even free societies might drift towards modes of thinking or social organization that limit genuine freedom and diversity of thought.
So the book is less an equation, more a warning.
Precisely. A cautionary tale. And you see that in how the book was received, praised by some conservatives, heavily criticized by progressives. It definitely touches a nerve.
It certainly makes you pause and think about the assumptions baked into our own political world, doesn't it?
It really does. It pushes you to ask, can the very pursuit of good things like equality or freedom sometimes lead us down paths we didn't intend if we're not constantly vigilant and maybe balancing them with other important human goods?
That's a really potent thought to end on, something to chew on.
Definitely.
So if this conversation has got you thinking, we'd love it if you'd subscribe, maybe share this discussion with someone else you think might find it interesting.
And if you want to go deeper, really grapple with Legutko's arguments yourself, we'll put a link where you can find his book, The Demon in Democracy.
But most importantly, perhaps, just take some of these ideas away with you. Think critically, question the underlying assumptions. It's always worth doing.